Thank you very much. It's good to be able to speak again in this debate. And I'd like to start by acknowledging and thanking two very special people in Dunedin who work at the coalface of people who are low-paid, vulnerable and dealing with huge budgetary issues in their lives. And their names are Shirley Woodrow, who is the front person for the Budgetary Advisory Service in Dunedin, and Nairi Duke, who fronts the team at the Citizens Advice Bureau. Now, there are other people who work with both those services, but they're both really tiny little teams that make a huge difference in our community, which is one of the many communities throughout New Zealand which is grappling every day with the effects of bad practices on the part of people who are organisations who are lending money and charging exorbitant interest rates and undergoing very dodgy practices which are having huge ramifications. Yes, there's a responsibility on behalf of the people who are taking out these loans and who get themselves into these situations. But to be frank, I think that everybody across the House tonight would acknowledge that there are very, very strong reasons for the terrible situations that people find themselves in this country. And as the Minister himself acknowledged before, New Zealand does have a reputation for being a good place to do business, a transparent place to do business, and in general a corruption-free place to do business. But if you scratch the surface of that reputation, underneath you do find practices that are not good and that have been endemic in this country and that need to be sorted. This legislation, which Labor is supporting, though we believe there's a really key part missing, and I'm sure you won't have missed that message tonight, Mr. Chair, that we do support it because it has to get passed. And so tonight, acknowledging the efforts and the daily grind of these small organisations that are underfunded, struggle, but carry on because they know the work they do is really important. Alongside them in Dunedin is the Community Law Centre and also the Dunedin Council of Social Services. And I could go on and on about these small organisations that often are staffed partly by volunteers because they're people who care enough about their communities to do this sort of work. And I'd like to make the point to the Minister tonight that the words that he used around people about the work that's being done to raise awareness of financial literacy, I'd like to see the facts and figures around how that's being increased and where that's being increased, because we're not seeing any increase in Dunedin. And I would imagine that a number of my colleagues who have spoke tonight and who will be speaking on this bill would say that they don't see any increase in the resources that are being put into improving financial literacy, to upskilling people in knowing how to manage the small amounts of money that they are being forced to live on, and to be able to make the choices that are going to enable them to carry on without having to apply for these loans and find themselves in this downward spiral of despair that they find themselves in, which is one of the reasons that we've got this bill in front of us tonight. So if we want to talk about resources, we've talked about the resourcing for the Commerce Commission. Well, one person in Mangere is not going to solve this issue, is not going to help with the enforcement of this issue, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to ask the Minister respectfully to when he says that he's been given guarantees by the Commerce Commission, well, the Commerce Commission, as I understand it, is already fairly stretched. So are there any further guarantees that are going to be looking at how the enforcement and the monitoring of this law is going to be carried out in other parts of the country? Are we looking at extra resources for financial literacy in schools, throughout tertiary education, throughout other parts of our community, Mr. Chair.
Claire Curran.
Thank you. Where we need this to be embedded in our culture in terms of how we manage our money, especially if you're on a very low wage. And especially if you find yourself in circumstances not of your own choosing, where you've lost your job and you've got a mortgage and you find yourself ending up needing to get access to money, and then finding yourself again in this downward spiral of despair and debt with high interest rates, Mr. Chair. So there's financial literacy and a financial awareness gap in this country, and I've sat on the Commerce Select Committee for nearly 6 years, and I have heard countless submissions from individuals, from organisations, and from organisations attached to government, saying that what lies beneath the reform in this area in terms of financial regulation is whether it's mum and dad investors, whether it's people taking out loans, it's financial literacy that is one of the issues in our country that is at the heart of these problems. So you can introduce laws like this tonight, Mr. Chair, with respect. We can, as a parliament, introduce laws like this tonight that we are passing through the committee stages tonight, but we need to address the underlying issues. And the financial issues don't just stop there either. The resourcing issues also go to the regulations and how the regulations are developed and how quickly they're able to be developed to enact this bill, because it's my understanding that this bill, even though it may get passed in the next short while, may not come into effect for 12 months. And it may not come into effect for 12 months if the regulations haven't been developed and haven't been developed in a way that's robust. Now, in order for that to happen, there needs to be adequate resourcing within the ministry. And Mr. Chair, through you, I would also respectfully ask the Minister to address those issues and to give an indication of the expectation of how long it's going to take for those regulations to be developed, so that the country tonight can be reassured that we're not going to have to wait another 12 months before this law can be enacted and introduced and be actually in law. Because we have waited for years. Before this government came into being to the end of 2008, this legislation was in development. And it comes out of very good work that was being done by the previous Minister of Commerce, or one of the previous Ministers of Commerce, because there's been a few in the last 6 years, was the Honourable Leanne Dalzell, who should also get a mention tonight with regards to this. But I've said in the first part of the debate on the committee stage that government has a number of levers that it can use in this area, and in this bill it has enacted it. It is introduced a number of those levers, which include the responsible lending code, the disclosure requirements, the clearer tests for unreasonable credit fees, and repossession agents to be licensed, etc., etc. But the missing link, the absolute missing link is the cap on interest rates. We're seeing that being introduced in jurisdictions throughout the world, other jurisdictions throughout the world. But is New Zealand doing it? No. Why is New Zealand not doing it? Well, it appears either for ideological reasons, because perhaps it couldn't have got the support of the government if the ACT Party hadn't supported it. And we certainly know that one of the previous Ministers of Commerce, Heather Roy, was opposed to interest rate caps. Or there could be other reasons, which perhaps involve lobbying from organisations. Now, the fact is, though, that interest rate caps have been introduced in many other jurisdictions. They've been named, but they include Canada, Mexico, Japan, Singapore, most South African countries, most South American countries, most African countries, most European countries, Japan, South Africa, and Australia. They all have interest rate caps and they have all done a substantial amount of work in this area. Why can't New Zealand do it too?
Chair.
Andrew Williams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I take a call on behalf